Welcome to Philly Prime. I'm Dave Schratweiser. This week, we're going to talk about the city still in mourning over the loss of Temple University Police Sgt. Christopher Fitzgerald almost 10 days ago now. A police officer on the Temple University force for quite a while, a husband, a father, a real big loss for the city of Philadelphia. And just the way it happened completely shocked everybody. And the city has been kind of reeling from this for the past 10 days. He was laid to rest last Friday. We didn't do this podcast last week out of respect to Sergeant Fitzgerald. We didn't want to talk about it until he was laid to rest a little bit. And nobody better to come on the show and talk about that than former Deputy Police Commissioner Kevin Bethel, who's now the Chief of Public Safety in the schools in Philadelphia. And Kevin, I know for you it's a bit of a personal loss as well. You know the family very, very well. Just talk to me a little bit about when you heard about this the other day. When it happened, kind of what was going through your mind, if you don't mind me asking.
No, I mean, listen. I mean, it's a tragedy in all places. You know, the Fitzgeralds. I think Joel Fitzgerald, Chris's father, and his mother Pauline and his wife. I mean, spoke eloquently about who Chris was as a person. And I think his unfortunate death. I mean, we all understand when we come into law enforcement the risk that we take. But it really resonates home, even as as part of your previous work and work in the police department. The first 2 years when Commissioner Ramsey came, we lost 8 officers. It's always difficult. But for me in my life, I mean, most of that has been as in the police department and on the the other side, on the policing side, to kind of feel it on the family side and seeing the impact it has on such good people, and great parents and just great families. It's hard to digest, but we continue to pray for them and their extended family, and hope for the best.
Yeah, and I got to say, the sergeant's wife, so strong, so courageous to get up and talk about him multiple times, and his whole family to come out and speak so highly of him like that, in addition to fellow police officers and things like that. You could just tell what a tremendous human being he was, father, husband, son, and a great police officer from all intents and purposes. Everybody that spoke said what a hard-charging kind of, typical kind of do it the right way police officer he was.
Yeah, and that's what folks, that's what people want, right? They want us to bring these men and women who are willing to sacrifice their lives, but also have all of those core elements that represent the community. You know what I mean? And when you have a young person like Chris who wants to serve, and who wants to give to the community and does it all. I mean, you're working on the campus and you're seeing some kids are still teenagers, right? And so you have to have that mindset to how to address them, but you also have to have the mindset to how you address, some of the unfortunate violence that's around the Temple campus or in other parts of the city. And so, oftentimes it's hard to get that dual, that person who can do it all. And then you do have somebody, and he's unfortunately taken away from us in such a tragic way.
Yeah. And it's, he's answering, it looks like some type of call right there where he sees 3 individuals, 3 young people, all dressed in black, masks. Things begins to investigate and then gets into a foot pursuit with the suspect in this case, who is Miles Pfeffer, 18 years old, from Buckingham Township. And he's just doing his job when he gets into a confrontation with him, an altercation, and then he gets shot. And then Mr. Pfeffer returns and, fires more shots at the officer, taking his life, and then proceeds to try and carjack somebody and then takes another car, dumps the car. This, for an 18-year-old kid, Kevin, this was some of the most horrific violence I've seen at that age. To think this through, it's just kind of amazing to me, all of these elements that are contained in this crime.
Yeah, but I think those elements exist all the time, right? I mean, you have somebody who wants to live that kind of violent life and adopt that kind of violent culture that goes with it. I mean, when you're on Twitter and you're flashing money and you got a gun in your waistband, and so you map that out in your mind, right? I am that person. and oftentimes you see individuals, in my opinion, like that have already made that decision of what they're going to do when they encounter someone, whether it be i.e. police department or even someone in the street.
Mm.
This is how I'm going to do it. Yeah, I mean, do it. And so I don't think this was something he just randomly made the decision to do. I think he had already premeditated, his decisions that if I get encountered by a police officer or someone else, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. And so it is something that we struggle with. I think oftentimes we, in these deaths of our police officers, we forget the sacrifice, but we forget that there was so many before him,
Mm.
as well,
Yeah.
that have lost their lives, and particularly even in the 22nd district where he lost his life. I mean, and so it's hard. It's hard to understand, but when you're living that life, I mean, I tell people it's not just about, we try to talk about poverty, and poverty is, I think me and you have talked about this before. I
Yeah,
get
we
that,
talked
I
about it last
understand
week.
that,
Yes.
and there's some
Yeah.
people who kind of, hey, but we can control for poverty. There was poverty when the numbers were 250 homicides, and and just a little under 1,000 shootings. So yeah, I mean, but it just really you can't control for folks who believe that they want to be in this violent lifestyle. I mean, who go through our communities and victimize, and attack, and shoot and kill people. I mean, we've seen it so often now, from a 2-year-old child to our elderly. And so there's no excuse
Mm.
for those individuals, and no
Yeah.
excuse for this individual.
Yeah. For folks who didn't see it on social media, there are multiple pictures of Miles Pfeffer um, with a band of $100 bills fanned out in his hand, with a gun stuffed in his waistband, which police, I believe, now think that may be the murder weapon in this case, although they haven't recovered it. But Kev, you and I talked about the mindset last week. The thing I had the most difficulty wrapping my head around with is that, officer then, now Sergeant Fitzgerald, was making a stop, and it was just a stop at that point. Now, if Mr. Pfeffer had a gun on him, he's probably, if he's stopped and arrested, he's going to be charged with possession of a weapon on the street, whether it was legal, illegal. If it was a ghost gun, as we've now heard it is, that's an illegal weapon. He's 18 years old. You can get them on the internet. We all know the background on those. But to go from a charge like that to the violence that this kid took it to, allegedly, right off the bat there, and then to return to the officer and shoot him 3 more times after he'd already shot him 3 times, just shows that cold heartedness that you're talking about. That I guess once you commit to that lifestyle, and once you commit your mind that that's who you want to be, you do it. And it's not even a thought process, probably. It's just you being what you think is the person you are.
Absolutely. I mean, and I mean, we oftentimes, even when I would deal with drugs, I mean, and when you encounter an individual who had a gun, and the drugs, and their freedom, when those 3 things were there collectively, is when you're in the most dangerous space.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you have this individual who's got a gun, now he may have other stuff. What Chris may have intercepted what they were doing, whether it was a drug deal, whatever it could have been.
Mm-hmm.
Now those 3 elements come into that space. When it even comes, it's even more toxic, right? It's just one thing, just a basic stop. But you and I both know it was just a normal stop. I don't have anything. The officer comes up and he goes through his process. But when you bring those elements together, is when it's the most dangerous time for a law enforcement entity, because and that person always has you at the advantage, right? Because we have all
Yes.
these layers of things that the police officer has to acquire, right? Reasonable suspicion and probable cause and all that. So I'm already at a tactical disadvantage. And then you have, an individual who decide, I mean, this individual or any individual now that says, hey, listen, I'm not going to jail, or I'm not going to get caught with this, or the things I have are going to cause this.
Right.
And that plays out every day. And it's the greatest fear that you have in law enforcement, both as a law enforcement officer out in the street, but even as somebody who used to be in that leadership position, that you put your men and women out into that space every day. And you hope that you've given the skills and the capacity, but there's always, unfortunately, that danger that comes with this job.
Yeah, and listen, the courage of the police officers on the Temple University police force and the officers in the 22nd district. Kev, you can talk about the 22nd district. To my knowledge, it's the second or third most violent district in the city, along with the 24th and the 25th up in the East Division. It's routinely a troublesome place. And as of recent, there's been a lot of armed robberies. There's been a lot of carjackings up there. It's been several Temple students who've been carjacked and or shot, those kind of things. So these officers have a lot on their mind. They have to be on their toes the entire shift from start to finish, and then some if they're working overtime, that kind of thing, just to work in that environment every day. And as you said, to be at a tactical advantage, like right off the bat, I just admire anybody who can fill those shoes and get behind the wheel of a patrol car in that area.
Well, listen, I've always applauded the work of all the men and women in the Philadelphia Police Department, and in particular the men and women in the Double Deuce, as we would call it, the 22nd, and supported and complimented with the Temple Police, because I mean, listen, most of North Philly is a good place, right? My mother-in-law lives in North Philly, and my mother did as well. I mean, and so the majority of those folks are in North Philly, even though it's a challenging community, are law-abiding citizens and do everything that we all do each and every day. I mean, but unfortunately, you have an element, because of just the dynamics and the level of poverty, and drug activity and other things in play, that we have individuals who are engaged in a lot of violence, unfortunately. And so you have to have men and women in that space to be able to meet that threat. I mean, and it's a challenge for the Temple police officers, right? I mean, just as anything else, they're a campus police department. It's not to diminish their role.
No.
I respect what they do, but at the end of the day, they're also, we can't also ask them, to now flip their hats oftentimes now. And now, we want them to be the 22nd district, right? I mean, they have other responsibilities that go well beyond just what a normal police officer does, particularly when you're working with college students on a college campus. It becomes different dynamics. And so I think that blended approach and them working in collaboration with the 22nd district. But I think we've also talked about that. I can continually say that, we can talk about the funding of policing. We can talk about doing different programming. We can talk about, implementing different programs to address the violence in the city. But there's an issue of now. Violence is happening now. The
Right.
failures of the system, are here at the doorstep. And so, we have to also recognize that when you don't, the staffing across the police department it reduces, and we're talking about, again, the process of funding has downstream impacts on all of us, i.e., whether we see it in our schools where, where we, again, we need the police officers to help us in our schools. The police departments have done a great job. But you also see it, in North Philadelphia, where, you may not have as much of the staffing that you used to have in previous years to support all the elements, and be a formidable partner, in ensuring the safety, not just of Temple, but Temple, the community, right? It's not just Temple, right. a part of the community. Chris, his death was so impactful because he was a part of the community too. He was a Temple community. And so, when I went to the event where they had at the campus, and you see all these students, many of them may not have encountered Chris, but they knew what he represented, right? He was someone out there protecting them, and I applaud them and appreciate it, and I'm sure, the Fitzgerald family, who were there and appreciated the fact that the students would come out and show that level of support. So it is a challenge across the board. It will continue to be challenging in policing, particularly as we see more guns on the streets, and then more people feel emboldened to carry guns because of, whether it's policies or whatever they're in place that, folks feel that they can carry a gun. And then most frustrating thing, Dave, is now you have folks out there telling, I never thought I'd be at a place where you start telling people they should, if you don't feel safe, carry a gun. Now we tell our young people is, hey, well, if you don't feel safe, you carry a gun.
Yeah.
I'm like, really? Even though we know the data tells you that the more guns folks are being carried, the more likely they're going to use them, the more likely we're going to have incidences.
Yeah.
So I don't know why we feel that's the right response, but unfortunately we have individuals out there, outreach workers and others who are supporting that theory.
Yeah. And I got to tell you, the troubling part for me too here, Kevin, is that Miles Pfeffer is from Buckingham Township. up in Bucks County. He lives on a 27-acre farm up there, 5 or 6 buildings on the property. Been a troubled kid, apparently, through school. Has been expelled from school several times. He's been the subject of discipline at school, things like that. And he and his brother and another individual come into Philadelphia. He comes in clearly armed, as if there aren't enough problems in the 22nd district for folks to deal with. Now you have folks from Bucks County coming in with a weapon. God only knows why they were there. It had to be for no good, based on the reason why the officer initially stopped them and started the conversation with them. That makes it even more troubling that we have, as you said, people who think it's okay to put a gun, ghost gun or whatever it was, in his waistband and come to Philadelphia to cause problems like this. That part of it was also difficult for me to kind of wrap my head around in a situation like this. There aren't enough problems in these districts that are trying to be addressed by the police department and Temple University Police to now have outsiders like that come in and do that.
Hey, listen, I mean, it is, I struggle with this one across the board, right? I mean, particularly when you have a kid who's coming from privilege, I mean, but I mean, I think we won't know until we get in, the family gets into that courtroom and understand, what the thinking was. And there's no why, right? I don't care what he thought about it, but there's no why. But I mean, but we do have to start to ask these questions, right? I mean, why does he feel, maybe he feels like everybody else that carrying a gun into the field is okay. I've always said this, and I said this to you before. To me, when we were doing the work under Commissioner Ramsey, I mean, and others, gun was the stop point, right? I mean, we could do restorative work. We were working to do other things. I mean, we were working to collaborative reform, with the federal government and outsiders to address police shootings. But when it comes to arresting someone and someone having a gun, they have to get that gun illegally. They have to carry that gun illegally, and then they have to use that gun illegally. Now we focus solely on the shootings and the homicides, but I think that people should take a hard look at the videos and watching the gunplay when we're going into our convenience stores, or they're walking up on people, or just the other week, a young lady gets killed defending herself because I mean that's the problem, right? That's the problem when folks have to feel that we've created an environment where I'm defenseless to the point that I have to go out and get a permit to carry a gun, so someone will not rob me or hurt me, and then in that unfortunate case, she loses her life. I mean, we need to start asking some really hard questions, because if we set the tone that you can carry a gun in the city of Philadelphia, I mean, with the level of violence and the amount of guns we have it's not going to stop the violence we see out here if we're not if collectively everyone's focused on the fact, of what we should be doing with gun possession.
Yeah, and I got to tell you and I talked about this the last time you were on the show. Philadelphia police in 2021 took 6,400 guns off the street, and we still had record numbers of homicides and shootings. So it just goes to show you that the proliferation of this now is crazy. And we talked about this on the last show as well. You got 14 and 15-year-old kids thinking they have to carry a gun because they'd rather be busted with a gun than get shot and killed if they go somewhere and the situation turns on them. That mentality is kind of what's driving some of this. But here's a kid coming in from Bucks County to do harm in Philadelphia, allegedly, which is why everybody thinks that's why he was there. But again, the why doesn't matter at this point. The fact of the matter is, according to the DA's office and the police department, he did it. He's charged with 25 separate charges here. I mean, they threw the book at this kid, and they should. But as you said, you got to kind of unwrap what is all this, and we need to ask tougher questions, like you just said.
Well, we do, right? I mean, we do. Like we really have to start asking some of those more difficult questions around, gun possession, and the why. I mean, I don't know if any of you or your viewers watch the drill rap, Dave, but you have young people now going online telling them, they call it doing their ops, as they call it, right? And they actually talk about who they're going to shoot, and will come back and tell you who they shot. I mean, and so, we can sit there and say that, put our blinders on and act like we don't see it, or we can continue to make excuses for folks, for folks out here who who want to engage in this violent behavior. But at some point, you know, it is hard, Dave. It's hard to understand, you
Yeah.
know, how we in this place right now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to understand, you know, how there's not a lot of noise around. I mean, yeah, as you saw, you know, it was unfortunate because when I was talking to Joel Fitzgerald, Chris's father, you know,
Mhm.
and called them the day that they were out at the vigil where Chris was shot. You know what I mean? And he's talked about he's getting back on the bus because we just had another shooting where two teenage kids were shot down the street,
Right.
only a block away. And he's like, Kev, this is crazy, right? And then on the Thursday, the day of the viewing, there's 7 people get shot on the west side of the 22nd district. I mean that should have us all rattled, right? That should be, making, people should be from the rooftop saying, what is going on here?
Right.
But we've again, and I've had this conversation with you before. This is not normal, right? It is not normal for our communities to be inundated with so much violence. I mean, and to the point that we're, it's one of the most. I often tell people, it feels like at times. I mean, many of these areas are some of the most violent areas in America now.
Mm.
When you look at the data across the different cities and the level of violence we're seeing in the shootings and homicides, it's easy to make that statement without even looking at the data.
Yeah.
And the level of trauma and all the things that are going on in those communities, and we, and folks in positions of power have to make some hard decisions as to, what are we going to do?
Mm.
I mean,
And you talked about direct action that needs to be taken now. I mean, there's a lot of programs in the pipeline. There's a lot of money being put into those programs, as there should be. Intervention programs. They had a big news conference the other day about a program that's been up and running for about a year now in Philadelphia. Seems to be making some progress. But at the same time you're doing that, these things are still occurring on a daily basis. And as you spoke, clearly a police officer, his wake is being held, a vigil is being held, and the violence continues all in and around that area, right where we're talking about. And you said it early in the show. There needs to be some direct action, and direct action now. It can't just be programs that are in development.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, listen, we there's always been these three elements of policing, right? Well, just in general, crime and how to address crime is through prevention, intervention, and there's always been in the enforcement piece. And policing has spent much of its position in the enforcement, but enforcement also garnered prevention and intervention, right? Because if I intervene and get this gun from this individual, and that individual now can't take that gun and shoot somebody, that's to me prevention, intervention, and enforcement.
Right.
And so for those, it doesn't have to be. You can do both, right? I mean, I applaud the work that folks are doing in the prevention space, and they've been doing that. Many of them have been doing that for years, for decades. I applaud the work around intervention, and we in policing have always said that. We've oftentimes felt like we were out here by ourselves, right? We were, you weren't doing your job, and so what we were getting is what was coming out on the other side because other folks upstream weren't doing their jobs. Now we conveniently only focus on the policing, but the reality is, a lot of the stuff that these kids are going through much earlier in their lives, where folks haven't done what they were supposed to do, and now on the back end of that, I get this kid who's troubled or this adult who's had a difficult life. I mean, and so it is a three-pronged approach. And if we think that we are going to solve our problems by just pushing the police department over here onto the side, and we're going to look at prevention and intervention, which I will say is the absolute right place to be. But we also know that those things will take time and take an immense amount of money to develop. And at the same time, while that is happening, we have the people being shot. And well, listen, we talk about, as I mentioned earlier, we talk about shootings and homicides. We forget the many, the robberies and the aggravated assaults and the domestic abuses. And in many of those categories, a disproportionate number of those individuals are folks of color who are the victims. You know what I mean? And so it follows the same kind of line as we do with our shooting victims and our homicide victims. So to act like we're going to just ignore that Policing has a responsibility. We all, in my former days, and even still today, carry that with my heart, that we
Yeah.
have the responsibility to provide service and support and protect our communities. And now you pull us, and now you don't want us in that space. You don't even want to talk about, our
Yeah.
role. But hey, guess what, Dave? And I've said this multiple times. People call 911 2.5 million times, a year.
Yes,
Maybe
they do.
65, 70, I don't know, 65,000 offenses
Yeah.
where people are victims who are calling the police every day. I mean, majority of a police officer's job has nothing to do with shooting his gun. Most police officers will leave the job never ever firing a gun except on the range,
Right.
right? But we make everybody believe that the police officer is the evil entity. When did we get to that place where we believe we went to the community to believe that the police officer, we all came from this community. I'm born and raised in this community. But
Mhm.
now you try to betray me to make your goals and meet your goals
Mhm.
and try to do what you want to do. You have to suppress me and diminish who we are. And I ask you why. Like
Mhm.
you believe that the police officer going down the street today is the enemy?
Yeah.
If that's the case, then we are absolutely failing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We're in bigger trouble than you and I
yeah,
think we are.
absolutely, as a
Yeah.
society. And then we're surprised when the police officer, when no one wants to become on the police department.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, yeah, because they look up. It was nothing more prideful for me, Dave, when me wearing my uniform. I wore it to bed, man. I wore that
Yeah.
thing. You know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
because it was with great pride. And
Yep.
guess what? That was in the early in 1986. And guess what? Folks, it was just as violent and crazy then, but folks respected the uniform. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
we've allowed folks who've taken on these voices. You know what I mean? I don't ever sit here, Dave. When you ask me about intervention and prevention, I don't dismiss them.
No.
I applaud that work, right? If you ask a police officer today, if he had all those tools on his toolbox, to give out jobs instead of, all that, he or she would do that all day long. We've said for a long time
Mm.
that we needed that support if this system was ever going to change. And now that you came into
Yeah.
the space, you don't have to destroy policing to do that. We can work in collaboration together. But this
Mm.
whole mindset, to me, is just really failing, and it's failing our communities. I mean, because at the end of the day, no one should be walking through our communities terrorizing anybody with a gun,
Mm.
or sticking a gun in somebody's face
Yeah.
and say that, hey, I'm gonna rob you and take money from you, that you worked all week for,
Mm.
and find that to be acceptable.
Mm.
It just doesn't work.
And let me point out, to my knowledge, Sergeant Fitzgerald was chasing Miles Pfeffer, didn't have his gun out, was trying to make an apprehension, trying to conduct an investigation there and make an arrest. And he was doing exactly what you talk about. Everybody, if you think police officers are just out there to shoot their gun when they have an opportunity to, I've known probably over my 36-year career in and out of Philadelphia covering law enforcement, I've maybe know 25 cops who fired their gun on the job, maybe 25. You want to push it to 40, maybe 40. Over 36 years with 6 or 7, 8,000 police officers, not just in Philly, in the counties, in other cities in our area. As you said, that's not a thing police officers want to get out there on the street to do. That's the last thing they want to do.
And there's no question about it. And we kind of wedge everything into this. We don't look at the big picture, as you indicated. I mean, when a
Mm.
police officer comes up and he says that, he's stopping someone and he has reason suspicion to believe that the person may have a weapon, it is for that exact purpose, so that person does not use that weapon
Mm.
to hurt him or kill him. Under Terry versus Ohio, we say stop and frisk, but it's a legal standard.
Mhm.
Terry versus Ohio, and when he meets that standard, he has the authority to be able to search. But people need to understand that purpose of that search is first and foremost to protect the officer. And I
Mm.
mean, it's not about getting the gun and having him arrested. First and foremost, it's for
Right.
protection.
Yeah.
And that's what Chris is doing in his work, right? He's going to go and engage, and then he's going to take those steps, in that process.
Mm.
Unfortunately, in this case, obviously he did not get to that place, and unfortunately, in this case, this individual was able to get his weapon before Chris was able to get his.
Yeah.
And
I wanna-
I'll also say, Dave, and also
Yeah.
what you noted, what you mentioned earlier is what folks need to also understand. When you talk about what the police department captured last year, you know, that's significant. I mean, I don't think your audience should ignore the fact that when the police officers, and I don't know how many of those weapons were captured because they just possessed them in a different way. But
Right.
even we took 50% of them, where an officer gauged an individual,
Yeah.
was able to successfully retrieve that weapon from them and arrest them. Now that's dangerous work.
Yeah.
All of those times that they contact a person with that gun is dangerous work, and they do that because they're trying to protect the community.
Right. That
Yeah,
saves lives and prevents victims. Correct?
absolutely. You do
Yes.
that work because that's what you were brought here. That's what you do. When Chris is out there he's doing the work. He's doing the
Yeah.
work that hardcore on the
Boots,
ground
boots on the ground
boots on
work.
the
Yeah.
ground work that
Yeah.
most people who sit in these ivory towers have no damn idea what it's like.
Yeah.
Right. And it's two worlds. It's the one they see and it's the one that you actually operate in. And from policing, sometimes you're down in the well operating some of the most challenging, violent, difficult environments you can ever imagine. And men and women do it every day in a constitutional way, in a successful way. And so, this argument that somehow the policing is this evil entity and just doing what they want to do
Yeah.
and rogue is just wrong.
Speaking of men and women who do their job, as this shooting was occurring, a officer, a corporal from the 22nd District, came outside after the shooting and walked towards the scene and saw two individuals hiding in an alley. Summoned those two individuals to come over. They made some kind of comment or story that they were trying to get a ride back to Doylestown, and that kind of struck as not proper to the officer involved. She's a veteran officer, a corporal in the 22nd District. She detained those two individuals. They contacted the homicide unit. It turns out it was Miles Pfeffer's brother and a third individual who were actually with him when this all started, when Sergeant Fitzgerald came in contact with the three of them on the street at 17th and Montgomery. I might have been 15th and Montgomery at the time. So here she is out doing her job after a shooting just occurred where an officer is down, reported down and on the way to the hospital, does her job, apprehends these two, detains these two, turns them over to homicide. And the apprehension and detaining of those two individuals led to the identity of this suspect and to where he might be and where they might find him. That was a treasure trove of information, instant information, because of an alert police officer.
Well, listen, I mean, and I don't know all the particulars, Dave. You probably, you're much better at it than me when it comes to those particulars. But
yeah,
but I think it's just also indicative of policing and the collaborations and the process. I mean, I've always said we have some of the best police officers in America, and we have some of the best investigators and supervisors and leadership in America, right?
Yeah.
And so, those are the things that you expect, in these cases that an alert officer who's been trained appropriately and effectively sees something out of line but also being smart enough to make sure that they follow the cadence of where we to make a successful conclusion, right? And so I definitely applaud everyone that's involved, and I also know in my experience the 22nd District, because they experience oftentimes a higher level of violence in other parts of the city, the men and women were really, I thought were better, not better, but had a better understanding and really a really good laser focus on what their role and responsibility as a crime scene. What do they do, effectively to make sure that the investigation moves forward appropriately. But those are the things that oftentimes get forgotten in all of the activity that's going on. That behind the scenes, there's another engine running to make sure that people are brought to justice, not just in Chris's cases, but in other cases where you can bring a conclusion very quickly.
Yeah. Let's try to maybe end this on a little bit of a positive note. I'm sure you were moved by the vigils that occurred for Chris. The one at Temple you already mentioned, where several thousand people turned out. Students who, as you said, probably didn't even know who Chris Fitzgerald was. Maybe they had some contact with him, minor contact in and around the campus, that kind of thing. There was a GoFundMe page for the family that came up. The FOPs ran a fundraiser to raise money for his family. And you could see from the crime scene where there was a visual, memorial set up there and on campus and in other places at police headquarters, Temple Police Headquarters, that kind of thing. It did seem that the community kind of wrapped their arms around the family and the people most directly impacted by this, and kind of came together to try and ease the pain just a little tiny bit here. It's impossible to ease this kind of pain, but it did seem like out of this came a love for the sergeant that is appropriate at this level, to the point where everybody kind of wanted to pitch in. It seemed to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you're definitely on point. Dave, the night that Chris was unfortunately murdered at the hospital, and just really seeing the response from everyone. In particular, I just really I'm not the spokesman for the Fitzgerald family, and I know Joel
Yes.
and Pauline would give me some deference just because we're in this space, but I think the fact when the police department it was recognized right away that Temple didn't have the capacity. It never lost a police officer in the line of duty.
Right.
And so what they did I don't think will ever be forgotten. For me personally, as part of the extended family, and I know I know I'm not speaking out of turn for Joel and Richard and Pauline, but that it was a special thing to see, because as I shared earlier, had not been on the other side of this level, at this level before, and that was very, very important. And from that night, what they would do all the way out to the burial was absolutely amazing, and I gave them great credit for that, and much appreciation. And even Temple University, when President Jason Wingard, butchering that.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's all right.
yeah, Wingard. I don't know where I got a V from, but I mean, coming to the house and making sure that he was supportive of the family, him and his wife, and that with the entire Temple family, coming to that space with him was really, really important. And then those supports that Temple brought into that space. And then when I looked at the GoMe, I was like just amazed and just taken aback at the level, if it was just amazing to see, just the sheer support that came out for the family, and it was amazing to watch, and it gave me hope, that despite all of the detractors who say that who see policing as this thing that they don't want to exist anymore. It gave me hope to see that there's so many people out there who appreciate the work that these men and women do every day.
Yeah.
And that when they give their lives, it has purpose. And hope that those legacies, both Chris and many before him who've lost their lives, that the legacy continues in that space.
Yeah, and I got to say, Philadelphia, as you cited before, has had way too much practice doing this. From the 8 police officers killed in a 2-year period back, you and I remember that really well. That was just the toughest time the Philadelphia Police Department has gone through in a short time period like that. They know.
I try to cut you, but what's also amazing? I saw some of the wives came to the funeral together.
Yeah.
That was really mad. I looked over to my left, and I'm like,
yeah,
there's such special ladies to do it, even though I know that brings back a lot of trauma for them, a lot of grief.
Yeah.
The fact that they would take their time to come was when I looked over to the left, I said, "Oh, the ladies are here."
Yeah, and I think I've met most of them and had conversation with many of them. They are the bravest individuals you could possibly want to be around.
Absolutely.
And they exude that kind of courage and bravery that you just got to look at them, and you can see a little halo above their head there because of what they've been through, and the fact that they're strong enough to come to a funeral like that, where this has all got to come flowing back for them at that point, especially when you have a funeral at the Basilica like that, where most Philadelphia police officers killed in the line of duty, they have their funerals. I mean, if you've ever been to one of those, and you've been to as many as I have, the pageantry and the respect and honor that is paid to police officers, from the way they march in and march out to the number of police officers who show up from around the country. Sergeant Fitzgerald got that honor, and God bless him, and I hope he rests in peace here. And I wish nothing more for the family than good coming forward for them. It's just a horrible thing to go through. You and I have seen it so many times over your career and over my career. It's just it's a devastating feeling.
Too many times, Dave. Too many times.
Kevin, thank you for coming on the show today. I appreciate it. I know this is a tough time for all those who've been in law enforcement or are currently in law enforcement. You have our best and our prayers and our condolences for that. To the Fitzgerald family, also want to give our condolences there, and to the community that reached out and tried to help in a horrible time period here for the family, for Temple University Police, and for police in general. Just thanks for doing that, and thanks for listening to the show today. Kevin, thanks for coming on. I appreciate you.
All right. Thank you for having me, Dave.
All right, great. That's it for Philly Prime this week, folks. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again next week.